Hi, it's Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter, and welcome to this video or podcast, depending upon how you consume it. For those of you who've been with me for a while, you know from time to time I interview people who are experts on a particular subject. Chris Huff is the author of The Millennial Whisperer. I'll have a link in the show notes to where it is on Amazon if you decide to order it, who talks about managing millennials in modern times. Now, it's about 30 minutes in length. He has an offer at the end that you can pick up at the Millennial Whisperer forward slash, I'm sorry, let me try that again. The millennialwhisperer.com forward slash no BS. And I'll just simply say, take the test, take advantage of the offer, listen to the show, watch the show. I think you'll enjoy it. Chris is an up personality, and he really knows the material. And with that, let's get going. So my guest today is Chris Huff, who is someone who became the youngest partner in the 100-year history of the Atlanta-based advertising agency 22 Squared, where he basically turned a team of millennials from an investment, which translates into pains in the butt, to a major profit center in short order without using ping pong tables, beer kegs, participation trophies, or anything like that. And he's the author of The Millennial Whisperer, a Morgan James publication, a practical, profit-driven playbook for leaders to better understand the world's largest generation. I'll have a link in the show notes, by the way. Chris, thanks for making time today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited to wrap on this.
Ooh, rap. That's an old person.
That's a back and forth. That's what we're going to do. We're going to rap.
Man, I like that. So anyway, millennials, we kind of treat them as a monolithic group, but they really aren't, are they?
Yeah, I mean, so one of the big things, and I do it right at the beginning of the book, is I set them out. It's a very large generation. I mean, we're talking about people born between 1981 and 1996.
Wow.
And what I do is in the book, I set them into two different generations, older millennials and younger millennials. And what makes them two very different generations within that large date range is two important factors. One is the fact that older millennials had beepers in college. Okay, so in order to get in touch with someone, this beeper would go off on their pocket, and then they would go find a phone and call them. It's very different than the younger millennials, where at age 13, they were given a brand new iPhone with a Snapchat account on it. And so technology is the first piece of what makes them two very different generations, because the younger millennials have been immersed in it, and they've had, I talk about the differences in flirtations even, right? There's an interpersonal muscle that has grown with time, when especially boomers and Xers can attest to this, and older millennials can attest to this. But in order to go and even go on a first date, you had to have like 9 different interactions with you had to call a house, and then you have to get through the parent. And then once you were through the parent, you got through to whoever it is you're trying to flirt with, and so on and so on. Whereas now, the first flirtations with the younger millennials, they happened on their backs while they're sitting in their bed on their phones.
Yes.
And so the first piece is technology. The second piece is when the recession of 2008 either hit them, older millennials were in already the workforce, younger millennials saw their parents lose their jobs. So the recession of 2008 had a huge impact on what makes them very different. And, we'll get into the nitty gritty and the fun stuff in the application, but some of the things like autonomy is one of the big concepts that comes up in what this massive generation is looking for. But autonomy for older millennials is much more important than younger millennials. And
it's interesting because, when you're talking about the communication style, and one's obviously a digital native and the other one is, I'll call it a hybrid.
Sure.
Because when you talk about a BlackBerry, I have trouble even as I dare say boomer. Sorry, folks, I'm a boomer.
Yeah.
My name is Jeff. I'm a boomer. Hi, Jeff. Welcome. Chris, what are you, by the way?
Yeah, so I'm right on the cusp. I'm 1980, and I usually start my speeches that deep down, I'm much more of a millennial than most millennials. A lot of the things that millennials are looking for are something that have kind of either naturally come to me or I've been predisposed to that. And so it makes me a little bit, I think, more inclined and an early adopter of some of these techniques that, the book is built around.
Cool. So would you want to focus on the older, the younger? Where are we going to play most of our time with?
So, I mean, I think we're gonna talk about both of them. I mean, I think the key is just understanding that we can't be all things to all people, and let's start with the older millennials, and then once we get them, we can focus on the younger millennials, and now Gen Z. I mean, Gen Z is starting to enter our workplace right now, and one of the things that I always emphasize is that I do think that generations get better and better as they go along, but I think our roles as leaders, there's things that we can learn from them, but there's also things that they need to learn from us. And, you know, I think it's with this understanding of the technology piece. It's really important that we emphasize our role as leaders is also to teach them, right?
Absolutely.
And the ones that are coming in now, there's a reality to this thing. So I talk about tactics that I put into place that I think that we need to all be doing, which is helping them build this interpersonal muscle, because it doesn't come naturally. I have a rule within our walls that if you're going to talk to someone else within the agency, you've got to get up out of your butt and go talk to them person to person. No IM, no texting, no chatting on your devices.
No video
All going to
even?
happen. No. So Zoom, I do think Zoom does help things a lot, but it's certain things like that, along with I think another one of my rules on what do we need to instill on them and a little bit of ourselves is like my 70-30 rule, right? 30% of your job.
I want to come to the 70-30 rule. Just give me 1 second.
Yeah.
When I get, because I'm a parent of a Gen Z person.
Yep.
And I find Gen Z, not just him, but a lot of Gen Z are remarkably like the boomers. And the statistic I've seen about them, and this was the one that was painful for me to read, is their first memory of a significant cultural event is the Great Recession versus having seen 9/11 on YouTube. I'm not sure where it is for the younger millennials with 9/11. I would suspect they might be old enough to have, some of them might be old enough to have the personal experience of that. The younger ones might not, but it's a different cultural milieu. And the one thing I do know is I don't care what the age, but there tends to be that patronizing sort of attitude that older people have toward younger ones.
Always.
And as such, no one likes it. You don't like it. No one likes it. And I'll speak of people my age. No one of us likes it when people patronize us and talk down to us.
Yep.
Certainly, why would you think they would?
Totally.
While you pontificate.
Exactly. And one of the things that I say in a lot of like kind of my media interviews is we've got to stop using millennial or even now Gen Z as a synonym for young and inexperienced, because guess what? They're young and inexperienced. So let's stop kind of tainting that whole thing and understand that anytime in our history, we have this difficult time of transitioning to that next generation. And you've got that massive disparity. And it was funny, I was speaking at an event 2 days ago, and I alluded to the time of, I spoke at a Rotary Club event, and I'd say the average age was like 75 years old. And a lot of people came up to me afterwards. It wasn't what I expected. So, you've got people right in the boomer zone, and they're like, Chris, this is so refreshing because this is the same stuff that we had to go through. Right. And I was like, wow, like, look at that. We all go through the same sort of thing.
It's the hardest thing for a lot of people to get, is that whenever a new group enters the workforce, it's like, oh, they'll never adjust.
Yeah.
Oh, what a pains in the butt. Oh, and they do.
Exactly.
And both sides tend to adjust with one another. Now,
Exactly.
how large a team do you have, and what turns you into a millennial whisperer?
So yeah, we have 370 employees at our firm. 90% are millennials, and so a very large company. And it's but small enough and independent, which is great. It allows us to practice a lot of these things and see what works and what doesn't. And one of the things I emphasize to a lot of medium-sized corporations, or even ones that are smaller in nature but have very different kind of clusters of individuals, is allow people to build subcultures within your culture. Allow people to feel the freedom to do that, because what the people in IT are looking for in their group is very different than the ones in sales. And so let that thrive. So my group here has been 30 people. I'm now actually building a consultancy within the agency all around the book, which is super exciting. But my group has been 30 people, and yeah, yeah, I think it's the most fulfilling group and generation to come along. It's just with these small tweaks that we need to be making.
Absolutely. So let's start diving into managing the millennial.
Yep.
What works? What doesn't work?
Yep.
And I'll follow your lead. Okay.
Sure. So, one of the big things that I talk about is, so there are two sides of managing millennials. One is what are they looking for from organizations? And then two, what are they looking for from leaders? And I like to focus much more on the leader part, but let me get the organizational part out of the way. I say throw away your ping pong tables, throw away the beer kegs, throw away, we have companies that are now building brand new buildings because they have a culture problem. So when you end up buying these things to then alleviate a culture problem, it's just a sign that there's something bigger going on.
Mhm.
And so the first thing is, what are they looking for from our corporations or our company organizationally? And the first thing that they're looking for is actually no different than any other generation. It's pay and benefits. Where it gets a little bit different than especially Gen X, is the second thing they're looking for is a positive work culture. So culture is really important to them. And I think a lot of people misinterpret culture to be these things versus actually it's how we lead them. It's how we allow them to thrive. We could have the starkest office environment you've ever seen, and people can still, this next generation can thrive with good leadership in place.
So when we get, I
Yeah, sure.
apologize for interrupting,
Yeah.
but when you speak about positive culture,
Yep.
I know in the boomer mind, the ones that devalue younger workers, there's the place about, oh, it's the participation trophy, that disparagement that goes on with millennials. And who gave them the participation trophy, by the way?
Yeah. Right.
So um, when you speak about a positive environment, they hear it as, I can't say anything to them.
Yeah.
I can't say anything to try and help them, improve them, what have you. They just won't take direction from it.
Sure.
And I know that's not what you're saying.
No.
What are you saying?
What I'm saying is the truth is somewhere in the middle, and we've got to adapt and they've got to adapt. And that middle ground can be an amazing place. And, feedback, one thing I say is that they are yearning constant feedback. They don't want to wait for their quarterly review or their or their yearly review, because a lot of the times that they've done that, they come in and they're told everything that they're doing wrong in that moment, versus real-time feedback can be done on the fly. And not only do they actually adjust to, even if that feedback is harsh in nature, I do say we got to build a better sandwich. So go in and compliment them a little bit, and then go in and give them that feedback, and then go in and end it with some sort of like build up message, right? And if you don't have someone that most of the time you're doing that, compliment, harsh feedback, or whatever feedback, and then compliment, then maybe they shouldn't be on your team. Maybe your standards are too low, because it just shows that a bad fit is happening if you have to give these course corrections all the time.
And it begs the question of, how did you hire them to begin with?
Exactly. And, I think our hiring, listen, a lot of the times that you have a bad hire, it's not necessarily because of work ethic or they don't understand how to do their job. It's oftentimes a culture fit. And one of the things I suggest in the book is suggesting that we actually test drive our workers for 6 weeks. So do freelance to hire, see if they're a good culture fit, and then go on and hiring them. And that's one thing. We see a 20% success rate. 20. So 8 out of 10 people do not succeed. 4 out of 5 people do not succeed in being that culture fit, because it is sometimes very difficult to find that right person. And I think we forget to think a little bit more entrepreneurially and experiment, to actually do that test drive. So that's one of the things, like culture fit wise, that I think is critical. And I know I digress and just talking about organizationally, the second thing, work culture. The third piece is what they're looking from organizations is work flexibility. And this one's so interesting because, the iPhone, the smartphone changed everything. So that we've got to start adapting our rules to allow people to work from where they want to work for certain so, I'm not saying every single day, but Fridays when there's massive traffic. I mean, in Atlanta, the traffic gets horrendous. So, we've got to be a little bit more open to our people being able to get their work done on their own turf or where they want to be working from, with a little bit more work flexibility, because the iPhone changed everything. And with that, I think our own expectations as leaders have changed. And I know me personally, if someone doesn't respond back to an email or text within like a couple hours, like what's going on right now? And so there has to be a give and take to that. And I think work flexibility is one of the places that we need to start adapting. And the one thing that I go up against talking to these, especially larger, more conservative corporations is, well, I had to do it this way. Why don't they? And we got to work through that and get over that. And so work flexibility is the third piece that is, I think, so important from an organizational standpoint. The fourth piece is purpose. And we'll talk a little bit more probably about purpose, but especially as you look at Gen Z and then the younger millennials, purpose is so important. And we're seeing in the last week, actually, big corporations finally stand up and say, we are no longer just going to be, treating our shareholders as our number one priority. For the first time, we're actually going to start putting some of these bigger things first. And so you're starting to see this shift happen, even in the large corporations, where people are putting purpose first and actually making a difference in the world.
And for those of you who haven't seen the story that Chris is pointing out, 100 some odd businesses got together. I think it was published by Business Insider,
Yeah.
where they basically spoke to the notion of it's not going to be shareholder and returning and revenue as being their prime driver. It's going to be much more around purpose, that the supply chain, the employees are all attended to well. And the shareholders were actually number 4 on the list, as I recall.
Yep.
Which is a huge shift. Now, whether they actually apply it this way,
Totally.
how long it'll take to permeate the culture of the organization, we're recording this in 2019, we'll all watch.
Exactly.
But in the meantime, that a number of major businesses, including JP Morgan Chase and Jamie Dimon, would come out and say this is remarkable.
Yeah. And so that's massive progress. And if they can do it, why can't our small, medium-sized businesses or mom and pop shops start following suit? And so, that's on the organizational side. But most of my curriculum and the book itself revolves around what's this next generation looking for from leaders? And the first thing that they're looking for is inspirational leadership. The second thing they're looking for is autonomy. The third thing they're looking for is transparency. And so, you break any one of those things down and we could have long conversations about it. So I'll ask you, where do you want to take it?
Oh, real simple. Organizational leadership, inspirational leadership and autonomy. Does that translate into we want a cheerleader who leaves us alone to figure it out from there?
Yeah, I mean, it kind of does. I mean, it's funny because I tell you that deep down, I'm much more of a millennial than most millennials. And It was 5 years at my agency, 22 Squared, that my wife turned to me, and she was kind of in awe. It was right around Christmas time, and we were driving back from our holiday party, and she goes, "Chris, you've been there 5 years. How have you, like, that's kind of an anomaly. Like, I would have expected you to go to one of these tech firms or one of these other places or start your own company." And my immediate response was, they've given me, the reason I'm still there and thriving is they've given me a long enough leash to be entrepreneurial, but enough structure that I'm always becoming a better leader. And I think it's with that balance that this next generation truly exemplifies. They do not want to be micromanaged, but they do want a leader to come in and show them, not necessarily, I think the inspirational leadership, I talk to a lot of introverted CEOs and they're like, listen, I'm not going to do that. And my emphasis to them is you can still be inspirational without being an extrovert or a keynote speaker like me. There
You
are
just have
ways
to
and
care.
tactics.
You have to care and make sure that they know that you care.
Exactly. And
And
so,
that's something that introverts really do very well. They're in deep in the weeds. They see and know everything. I'm sure that's a robocall, folks, but oh, it isn't. But no matter,
yeah,
can't take it now. So regardless, we're in a situation where people are always going to be wanting connection,
exactly. And you hit it right on the head. I
real
mean,
human
connection.
connection.
And that's what, I mean, that if you break down it, my whole platform is how do we bring more empathy and more connection to this world? And connection is so important. And what they're looking for in inspirational leadership isn't necessarily that rah-rah, although that is important. But they're looking for from you, and this kind of goes into more of the transparency and I guess vulnerability to a certain extent, but they're looking from you to be a real human. You don't have to be this stoic person that's just talking about the good. What they're looking for is they're looking for context. They're looking for you to build a large picture and talk about the mistakes you made. So if you didn't win a big new business pitch, or you lost a client, or you had to let someone go, be honest about it and create a big picture and use that as then a foundation to, or springboard to go off of, and talk about what are the things that you're now going to be doing differently. Because more than anything, they want the context. They want to see the big picture. So, not only that, but you bring up one of the most important points, which is connection. And I use tactically in the book an example of an executive and friend of mine, Mike Hibison from the Home Depot, who, you're talking about a very large corporation. And he has a lot of direct reports. And in his meetings with them, he gives everyone the option to either talk about work or talk about life. And 80% of the time, people talk about life. And it's through that Mike is able to create a real connection with his people in that 1 hour blocked off time that he has every month with them. And what ends up happening is that through that connection and through that real relationship, these people end up wanting to work harder. And they feel inspired because someone is actually taking a vested interest in them. Another tactic on the other extreme of this connection piece and inspirational leadership is I encourage all people to follow their people on social media. So what that does is when you come in on a Monday, you can say, to someone on the team, Meg, that habitat build that you did over the weekend looked phenomenal. Or that puppy you got is so cute. Where'd you find it? And it creates instantaneous connection and curiosity where they feel like they are valued. And I think, you hear time and time again, do your millennials need to be promoted every 5 months? Like, or do you have to make new job positions just for this millennial stuff? And I said, that's more of a symptom that you're not creating enough connection and enough recognition and rewards within your day to day. So they're relying on these other things to then, rise in the whole thing.
It's so funny, Chris. What you're doing is talking about, as a manager, as a boss, giving them a verbal like.
100%.
And as a verbal like, I know how I respond when my videos, my podcasts, or my articles get forwarded and shared, how I respond when I see lots of likes on an article. It's a good feeling for me. They're no different.
No, and you've got to remember, they are the product of helicopter parents, and participation trophies were a reality. Even me, I got trophies. I'm once again on that cusp. I got a lot of trophies that I didn't deserve, right? And so, you look at that coupled with especially the younger millennials, but even the mid millennials who are in the workforce in droves, they're just now starting to have families. A lot of them grew up with social media as that instantaneous reward and recognition. Anytime they wanted it, they posted that picture to Instagram and they got the 120 likes. And if they didn't get it, they took it down because they were too embarrassed about it because they didn't get enough likes. And so, what we're accommodating for is that. And it's funny because, one of the quotes that I have in my presentation is that if you're not utterly exhausted as your head hits the pillow at the end of the day, from overly recognizing and rewarding your people, you haven't done it enough. And people are like, well, Chris, this is exhausting. I don't have enough time in my day. And I said, listen, there are a couple simple things that you can do to accommodate for this. One is anytime that you get an email that's a compliment from a customer or someone else in the team, all you do is you press forward and you forward it to the CEO or whoever it is. Maybe it's also just anyone who's high in the organization, and you CC them and say, awesome job. That does not take that much, right? So it's making that a part of our daily routine that is so essential. And then you'll start to see your people thrive.
And generationally, and I'm going to speak to Gen X here because
Sure.
they're going to end up managing these people. My generation is going to retire, disappear, die, what have you. It's just a reality. But you're going to be working with these folks for years. So recognize that what they want to see isn't always the attaboy, attagirl.
Sure.
They just want to see care.
Exactly.
Just like you probably hated when your parents said, "Good job." And you said, what do I do?
Well, my dad's British, so I didn't get that many of those, but my probably.
Yes, it was a pretty common response. Good job. They did something good. And didn't seem like much. And thus, there's a basis for the rejection.
Sure.
As the dismissal. Here, it's more about the care.
Sure. And, I think that one of the big things that I like to emphasize is you look at these concepts of both inspirational leadership as well as almost, transparency and connection. And, I think it's important to note that for autonomy, it doesn't mean that we have to live in this, bubble world, right? And that we can't give real feedback or have harsh criticism. So, I think that's an important point. But the other piece is what they're looking for is for you to push a little bit of that control down to them. And it's interesting, autonomy is oftentimes, once again, I think misinterpreted. And one of the best examples is in writing this book, I did a lot of research. And one of the things I did is I went to Google and I was like, number one boss for millennials. And sure enough, Google spit up Forbes, called out this guy, Ben Kirshner out of Philadelphia, as the number one boss for millennials. So I then looked in his profile and I found his phone number and I called him. And I said, Ben, listen, I'm writing this book. I'm really interested in how you've become the number one boss for millennials. Can we talk about a couple of these concepts that are important to them, autonomy being one of the most important? And he hit me back with one of the best things I've ever heard, which is, he goes, Chris, have you ever heard of this concept, protect your house? And I was like, not really. He goes, okay, well, listen, we have a culture at our firm and it's, there are hundreds of people, but we have a culture that is something to be proud of. And what I emphasize in every single one of my team meetings or company-wide meetings is it's up to you to protect this house. And if you have a bad culture fit, it's up to you to spit that bad culture fit out. With our unlimited paid vacation that we have, it's up to you to cover for one another. Don't go whining to me about this stuff. It's up to you all. So you protect this house. And I love that concept because it allows you to truly push down a lot of that control to them. And what you'll find is there's a checks and balances that naturally come up. So I love that idea of tactically, how can we look at autonomy in a new way?
It's interesting because what you describe in Protect Your House kind of reminds me what sports teams, the winning teams do.
Yeah.
There's always someone or a couple of guys in the locker room who are senior players, have a great reputation, function as leaders, as go-to individuals on different sides of the ball. I'll use football as the example here because I was a Giants football fan, and when Bill Parcells went to New England, before they got Belichick, there was that time where he would bring in former Giants players to lead the locker room so that he didn't have to do it.
Sure.
And thus, what you're describing in Protecting the House is having internal people who function as leaders for you. You work through them, not on top of them.
Exactly.
So we've been really running through a lot of material here.
Yeah, we have.
And I'm willing to go a little longer. I'm just curious, what haven't we covered so far that you really want to?
So, I think one of the big things is this is a give and take, right? As we look at managing these next generations, and there are certain things that they can offer us. For example, they are digital natives. They do think in an innovative way. They can bring a lot of that stuff if we manage them correctly. So we can rely less on ourselves learning all this new stuff and then push it down to them. But there's also a give and take in terms of the deficit that you all are witnessing in the workplace. And this deficit comes in the form of, I think, interpersonal skills to a certain extent, right? I mean, we talk about those first flirtations happening on their phone. There is a muscle that is happening, or a deficit with that muscle.
And I want to be clear, first flirtations can be personal or professional.
Exactly. This is very true.
Recruited from other organizations, folks.
This is very true. And so, one of the things I introduce in my book called like the 70-30 rule, which is it's up to us to, I think, help them understand that one, life is not an Instagram feed, and that a lot of these things that they're living digitally are not a reality. And I always use my example, and I tell anyone that's new to my team what's known as my river runs through it story, which is I will embarrassingly raise my hand to all of them and say, 4 years ago, I was at a wedding in Sun Valley, Idaho. And at this wedding, I hired a fishing guide and went to this fishing guide and said, I want two things. All right. Here's your $600. I want 2 shots of me, one of the still shot of the trout in the net, and then I want a video of me like a Brad Pitt from A River Runs Through It, fly fishing with the river going through in the mountains in the background. And this guy turns to me and he was dumbfounded and he goes, "You're going to spend $600 for an Instagram post?" I was like, "No, that's like $300 each. Let's go." And I use that as this example of, we do compare our insides to other people's outsides. We do have this idea that the grass is always greener on the other side. And the harsh reality is that it's not. And so we've got to remind our people, along with ourselves, that instead of going and leaving your job, let's give it a little bit more patience. And also let's understand that there's a 70-30 rule. 30% of your job is going to suck. 30% of your job is going to be places outside of your areas of passion, and you just got to deal with it. 70% of your job should fuel you up and fire you up. And what I'll do is on their first day, take their job description and work with them. What's in your 70 and what's in your 30? And what will happen is when they're doing those things that they hate doing, that they just kind of have to do, they're knowing that on the other side of it is the 70% that's going to fire them up and fuel them up. And so I think that is one of the things that it's up to us to help them understand these things, along with, I think, flexing this interpersonal muscle and encouraging as much person-to-person interaction as possible, because at the end of the day, your business will not grow without real relationships, right? And whether it be on the sales side or developing the relationship with the other person on the phone, whatever it is, but we've got to start helping them work on these things.
I agree. And I'll be the one who corrects you. At least that's how it is now.
Yes.
Because we don't know how it's going to be 5 years from now.
No.
I could just see us all in a different form of communication, doing video, and that's going to be more than enough for a lot of folks.
And I will be the first person to say that you can develop a real relationship like this. And I used an example of, it was a couple years ago, I was up at Snapchat, and we didn't even, well, so I went up to Snapchat and I went to go see one of my friends, Adam, and I was with a coworker of mine, and we go in there and I give Adam a big hug. It was right as they opened this amazing office in New York City. And I give him a big hug, and I start asking him about his 7-month-old daughter and all these things, and we start ranting. And my coworker, who'd never met Adam before, she goes, "How long have you guys known each other?" I was like, "Dude, how long have we known each other? Like 5, 6, 7 years? 7 years." And then Adam looks at me, he goes, "You know what? We've never met in person. Our whole relationship was actually through a Facebook group that we were a part of from the early days of social media. And it grew through that, and we've been texting and whatever, but the whole relationship was grown using digital." And so, I think we need to remember that, but also use those things to our advantage as we try to lead a very digitally driven generation.
And I'll speak from the perspective of, there's so many men I've met around the country from work that I've done with a group where we meet one time,
Sure.
and then the relationship builds from that digitally.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, think about it. We've had 2 video interactions. If I saw you in, a bar or a restaurant, I would come up and, probably bro hug you and we'd hang out, right? I mean, that there's a lot to be said for this.
Yeah, it does make a difference. Hey, Chris, thanks so much. How can people find out more about you, the book, the work that you do?
Sure.
And like I said, the link will be in the show notes,
I
folks.
love it. So I'm glad the link is in the show notes, because after writing a book on millennials, you quickly discover millennials a difficult word to spell. It's 2 L's and 2 N's. So if you go to the millennialwhisperer.com/no BS, you will see that we've set up a free download of the first chapter of the book, as well as you can take a free millennial leadership assessment to see how you rank on some of these tenets that we bring up in the book, 8 key tenets being a good millennial leader. So yeah, the millennialwhisperer.com/no BS. Obviously, you can pick up the book almost anywhere now, local Amazon, as well as your local airport. As of recently, we're in most of the airports. So that is exciting. We've sold over 45,000, almost 50,000 books. It's, I think, just now really starting to take off, and I appreciate anyone out there that has an interest. Go ahead and pick it up. And I also say that if you can't afford the book, or for whatever reason, get in contact with me and I'll send you one. So the best way to get in touch with me on LinkedIn is /Christopher Tuff. On Instagram, it's at Tuff22 or at Millennial Whisperer. And on Twitter, it's at Chris Tuff. So there you go.
Thank you. And folks, I'll be back soon with more. I'm Jeff Altman, the Big Game Hunter. And I hope you enjoyed today's interview with Chris. I enjoyed it. He looks exhausted, but that's a different conversation.
I could do this all day long.
And you do.
Yes.
And I just simply say, if you're interested in one-on-one coaching, reach out to me through my website, thebiggamehunter.us. There's a link there where you can schedule a time for a free discovery call. Have a great day, folks. Take care.